Welcome to Midnight Murmur. Here, the night comes alive with chilling tales and spine-tingling stories. If you crave the thrill of the unknown and the eerie whisper of the supernatural, you've found your new haunt. Join us as we dive into the darkest corners of the human mind, unraveling short horror stories that will keep you up at night. Hit that subscribe button, turn off the lights, and let the murmur begin. The Forgotten Path. It was supposed to be a relaxing weekend getaway. 5 friends Mark, Sarah, Emily, Jake, and Lisa decided to escape the city and go camping in the remote Appalachian Mountains. They loaded up Mark's SUV with camping gear, food, and enough alcohol to last them through the weekend. Spirits were high as they drove along the winding mountain roads, the autumn leaves creating a colorful backdrop. Everything was going smoothly until Mark decided to take a shortcut. "This route should save us at least an hour," he announced, turning onto an unmarked dirt road. The GPS showed a thin gray line that promised to connect them to the main highway eventually. As they ventured deeper into the wilderness, the road became rougher, and the forest around them denser. "This doesn't feel right," Sarah said, her eyes scanning the thickening woods. "Maybe we should turn back." "Nah, we're fine," Mark replied, his confidence unwavering. "We'll be back on track in no time." As the sun began to set, the road narrowed further until it was barely more than a trail. Thick fog rolled in, reducing visibility to almost nothing. The friends exchanged nervous glances, and even Mark began to doubt his decision. Then, without warning, the SUV lurched violently as the front tire hit a large rock. Mark swore as he tried to regain control, but the vehicle skidded off the road and crashed into a tree. The impact left them all dazed, but thankfully, no one was seriously injured. The front of the SUV was crumpled, the engine hissing and smoking. They were miles from any main road with no cell service and no way to call for help. "Great," Jake muttered, examining the wreck. "What do we do now?" "We're not far from our destination," Mark said, trying to sound optimistic. "We can hike there and come back with help." They grabbed their backpacks, making sure to take food, water, and flashlights. The forest was eerily quiet as they set off, the only sounds being their footsteps and the occasional rustle of leaves. After an hour of trekking through the dense woods, they stumbled upon an old, dilapidated cabin. The wooden structure was covered in moss and vines, and it looked like it hadn't been occupied in years. But with the sun setting and the temperature dropping, they had little choice. "This place is creepy," Emily said, hugging herself. "Are we sure about this?" "It's just for the night," Mark reassured her. "We'll rest here and continue in the morning." Inside, the cabin was just as rundown as the outside. The air was thick with dust, and cobwebs hung in every corner. An old, moth-eaten couch sat against one wall, and a fireplace filled with ashes suggested it had been used long ago. They set up their sleeping bags and lit a small fire for warmth and light. As they settled in, Lisa found an old journal tucked under a loose floorboard. Curious, she began to read aloud. The journal belonged to a man named Jacob Turner, who had lived in the cabin in the early 1900s. His entries started off mundane, talking about hunting, the weather, and daily life in the mountains. But as Lisa reads on, the entries grew darker. October 15th, 1903. "Something is out there. I can feel its eyes on me. The animals have gone silent, and the woods feel wrong." October 21st, 1903. "I found strange markings on the trees today. Symbols I don't recognize. The air is thick with dread." November 3rd, 1903. "They're watching me. I see them in the shadows. Twisted figures that don't belong in this world." November 12th, 1903. "I can't leave. The path is gone, swallowed by the forest. I hear whispers at night, and my dreams are filled with screams." As Lisa finished reading, an uneasy silence fell over the group. The wind howled outside, and the fire cast flickering shadows on the walls. Despite their unease, exhaustion eventually overtook them, and they drifted off to sleep. But their rest was far from peaceful. Each of them was plagued by nightmares, visions of twisted, deformed figures watching them from the shadows, whispers of incomprehensible words echoing in their minds. Mark woke with a start, his heart pounding. He glanced around the cabin, the dying embers of the fire casting eerie shapes. Something moved outside the window, a fleeting shadow that vanished almost as soon as he saw it. "Did you see that?" he whispered, shaking Jake awake. Jake rubbed his eyes, groggy and disoriented. "See what?" "Outside. I think someone's out there." Jake grabbed a flashlight and shone it through the window, but there was nothing. Just the dense, dark forest. "You're just spooked by that journal," Jake said, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. "Get some rest." Mark nodded, but sleep didn't come easily. The sense of being watched was overwhelming, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was lurking just beyond the trees. Morning brought little relief. The fog had lifted slightly, but the forest remained oppressive. As they prepared to leave the cabin, Sarah noticed something on the trees surrounding the clearing. "Look at this," she called out, pointing to strange, carved symbols on the bark. The markings were crude and ancient-looking, resembling the ones described in the journal. They were unsettling, hinting at some long-forgotten ritual or warning. "We should keep moving," Mark said uneasily. "Let's find the main road." They set off again, following what they hoped was the right direction. The forest seemed to close in around them, the trees growing thicker and the path less distinct. Every now and then, they found more of the strange symbols, as if they were being guided or herded. After hours of walking, they stumbled upon another clearing. This one was different, though. In the center stood a large, ancient stone altar, covered in dark stains. The ground around it was littered with bones, both animal and human. "Oh my God," Emily whispered, her face pale. "What happened here?" "This must be some kind of sacrificial site," Jake said, his voice shaky. "We need to get out of here." But as they turned to leave, they heard rustling in the bushes. They froze, their hearts pounding. The rustling grew louder, and then, with terrifying suddenness, a figure burst out of the undergrowth. The figure was a man, but his appearance was grotesque. His skin was pale and stretched tight over his bones, his eyes wild and bloodshot. He wore tattered clothes and wielded a rusted axe, his expression a twisted mask of rage and madness. "Run!" Mark shouted, grabbing Sarah's hand and pulling her away. The group scattered, each running in a different direction. The madman chased after them, his axe glinting in the dappled sunlight. Emily tripped over a root, and he was upon her in an instant, the axe descending with a sickening thud. Her screams echoed through the forest, cutting through the silence like a knife. Mark glanced back, his heart wrenching at the sight of his friend's lifeless body, but he knew he couldn't stop. They had to get away. Mark, Sarah, Jake, and Lisa regrouped deeper in the woods, their breaths ragged and hearts racing. Emily was gone, and the reality of their situation hit them like a freight train. "We can't keep running blindly," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "We need a plan." "He's not just one man," Jake said, his face pale. "There could be more of them. We need to stay together." They moved cautiously, every snap of a twig and rustle of leaves setting their nerves on edge. The forest seemed to close in around them, the trees like silent sentinels witnessing their terror. They stumbled upon a small stream and followed it, hoping it would lead them to safety. The sound of running water was soothing, but it did little to quell their fear. They had to keep moving to stay ahead of whatever was hunting them. As they followed the stream, they began to notice strange, handmade traps set along the path. Crude but deadly snares and pits, designed to catch and kill. "This is a hunting ground," Mark realized with a sinking feeling. They're not just hunting animals. They moved more cautiously, avoiding the traps as best they could. But the hunters were clever, and it wasn't long before they heard the snap of a trap closing behind them, followed by a scream of pain. Jake had stepped into a snare, the steel jaws clamping down on his leg. Blood poured from the wound as he cried out in agony. "We have to help him," Lisa said, her voice desperate. Mark and Sarah worked quickly to free Jake, but the damage was done. He could barely walk, his leg a mangled mess. "We can't leave him," Sarah insisted. "We need to find shelter," Mark said. "Somewhere to hide and regroup." They found a cave hidden behind a thicket of bushes, its entrance dark and foreboding. It was the best option they had, and they helped Jake inside, making sure to cover their tracks as best they could. The cave was cold and damp, but it provided a semblance of safety. They settled in, lighting a small fire for warmth and to fend off the oppressive darkness. Jake's condition was deteriorating. The makeshift bandage Sarah had fashioned was soaked through with blood, and he was slipping in and out of consciousness. Mark rummaged through their supplies, finding a first aid kit with limited resources. "We need to find help, and soon," Mark said, his voice grim. "He won't last much longer like this." As they tended to Jake, they heard faint whispers echoing from deeper within the cave. The sound was unsettling, like a chorus of lost souls. "What is that?" Lisa asked, her eyes wide with fear. "Stay here," Mark said, grabbing a flashlight. "I'll check it out." Mark ventured deeper into the cave, the flashlight casting long, eerie shadows on the damp walls. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, guiding him further into the darkness. The air grew colder, and a sense of foreboding settled over him. He stumbled upon a large chamber, its walls covered in the same strange symbols they had seen on the trees. In the center of the chamber was a crude altar, similar to the one they had found in the clearing, but this one was covered in fresh blood. Mark's stomach churned at the sight. This was no ordinary cave, it was a place of dark rituals and unimaginable horrors. As he backed away, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned, his flashlight beam revealing the twisted faces of more hunters, their eyes gleaming with malevolent intent. Mark bolted back toward the entrance, his heart pounding. The hunters were close behind, their guttural laughter echoing through the cave. He reached the others, breathless and panicked. "We need to go, now," he yelled, grabbing Sarah's arm. They helped Jake to his feet, half dragging him as they fled the cave. The hunters were relentless, their footsteps pounding behind them. They burst out into the forest, the cold night air biting at their skin. They ran blindly through the trees, the hunters' torches flickering in the distance. Exhausted and terrified, they stumbled upon an old, overgrown trail. With no other options, they followed it, hoping it would lead them to safety. The trail led them to an abandoned settlement, a cluster of decaying wooden buildings hidden deep within the forest. It looked like it had been deserted for decades, the structures collapsing and overgrown with vegetation. "Maybe we can hide here," Sarah suggested, her voice trembling. They found an old barn and barricaded themselves inside. The interior was filled with rusted farming equipment and stacks of rotting hay. They set Jake down gently, trying to make him as comfortable as possible. "We can't keep running," Lisa said, her eyes filled with fear. "We need to find a way to fight back." Mark nodded, his mind racing. They needed weapons, something to defend themselves with. As he searched the barn, he found an old hunting rifle and a box of ammunition, half buried under a pile of debris. "This might give us a chance," he said, loading the rifle. Night fell, and the hunters' torches appeared on the horizon, flickering like malevolent stars. They had tracked the group to the settlement, and their guttural calls echoed through the night. "We have to be ready," Mark said, positioning himself near a window with the rifle. The first hunter approached cautiously, his eyes scanning the buildings. Mark took aim and fired, the rifle's report shattering the silence. The hunter fell, but the others pressed on, undeterred. "They're coming," Sarah yelled, grabbing a broken pitchfork as a makeshift weapon. The hunters attacked in waves, their grotesque forms illuminated by the torchlight. Mark fired again and again, the rifle kicking against his shoulder. The others fought with whatever they could find: rusted tools, wooden planks, anything to keep the hunters at bay. The battle was brutal and chaotic, the barn echoing with screams and gunfire. Blood sprayed the walls, and the smell of death filled the air. But slowly, they began to push the hunters back, their ferocity giving way to desperation. When the last hunter fell, a heavy silence settled over the barn. The survivors were covered in blood, their bodies bruised and battered. Jake was barely clinging to life, his breathing shallow. "We did it," Lisa said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "We survived." But the victory felt hollow. They were still lost in the wilderness, with no way to call for help and no idea if more hunters were out there. "We need to find a way out of here," Mark said, reloading the rifle, "before more of them come." They gathered their remaining supplies and set off again, following the old trail deeper into the forest. The settlement faded into the distance, and the darkness closed in around them. The trail led them to a steep ravine, its sides lined with jagged rocks. A narrow, treacherous path wound its way down, disappearing into the shadows below. "This is our only way," Mark said, his voice grim. "Be careful." They descended slowly, the path slick with moss and mud. The air grew colder and more oppressive, the whispers returning to haunt them. Halfway down, Lisa lost her footing and tumbled, her scream echoing through the ravine. "Lisa!" Sarah cried, rushing to her side. Lisa lay at the bottom, her body twisted at a grotesque angle. Her eyes were wide with pain and terror, blood pooling beneath her. "We need to keep moving," Mark said, his voice choked with emotion. "We can't stay here." They carried Lisa as best they could, but her injuries were severe. Every step was agony, her moans of pain echoing in the darkness. The ravine led them to another clearing, this one dominated by a large stone circle. In the center stood an ancient, gnarled tree, its branches twisted and blackened. The ground was covered in strange symbols, and the air was thick with a palpable sense of dread. "This place is wrong," Sarah said, shivering. "We shouldn't be here." But they had no choice. They were exhausted, and Lisa needed help. As they approached the tree, they noticed a small, hidden entrance at its base. "Maybe there's a way out through here," Mark suggested, his voice hollow with desperation. They crawled through the entrance, finding themselves in a narrow tunnel. The walls were lined with more symbols, and the air was filled with a faint, rhythmic chanting. The tunnel opened into a large underground chamber, lit by flickering torches. Hooded figures stood in a circle, chanting in a language that sent chills down the spine. At the center of the circle was an altar, and on it lay a bound and gagged figure, struggling against their restraints. The cultists turned as the group entered, their eyes gleaming with malevolent intent. One of them stepped forward, his face obscured by a hood. "You have trespassed on sacred ground," he intoned, his voice echoing through the chamber. "You will be sacrificed to the Ancient Ones." Mark raised the rifle, but the cultist merely laughed. "Your weapons are useless here. The ritual has begun, and the Ancient Ones will have their due." The cultists moved forward, their hands outstretched. Mark fired, but the bullets seemed to have no effect. The group fought desperately, but they were outnumbered and overpowered. They were dragged to the altar, their struggles futile. The chanting grew louder, the air crackling with dark energy. Mark watched in horror as the bound figure was lifted, their screams muffled by the gag. The cultist raised a ceremonial dagger, its blade glinting in the torchlight. "The Ancient Ones shall rise," he proclaimed, bringing the dagger down in a swift, brutal motion. As the blood spilled onto the altar, the chamber shook with a violent tremor. The ground cracked and split, and a dark, swirling mist began to rise. The cultists chanted louder, their eyes wide with fervor. Mark struggled against his captors, desperate to break free. The mist coalesced into a towering, monstrous figure, its form shifting and writhing. It let out a deafening roar, the sound echoing through the chamber and beyond. "The Ancient Ones are free," the cultist cried, his voice filled with triumph. The monstrous figure lunged forward, its massive claws tearing through the cultists. The chamber erupted into chaos, the cultists' screams mixing with the roars of the creature. In the confusion, Mark managed to break free. He grabbed Sarah and Lisa, dragging them towards the tunnel. The creature's rampage had created a path of destruction, and they used it to their advantage. They fled through the tunnel, the walls shaking with each of the creature's roars. The ancient symbols seemed to glow with an otherworldly light, and the air was thick with the scent of blood and decay. They emerged from the tunnel, gasping for breath. The forest was eerily silent, the trees standing like silent sentinels. "We need to keep moving," Mark said, his voice barely more than a whisper. "We're not safe yet." As they stumbled through the forest, the terrain seemed to stretch endlessly before them. The dense trees towered above, their branches intertwining to block out the moonlight. Every rustle and snap of a twig set their nerves on edge, a constant reminder of the horrors they had just escaped. Lisa's condition was worsening. She was barely conscious, her breaths shallow and ragged. Sarah did her best to comfort her, but the reality was grim. "Mark, we need to find help, or she won't make it," Sarah pleaded, her eyes brimming with tears. "I know," Mark replied, his voice filled with frustration and fear. "But where do we go? We're lost." Suddenly, they heard the distant sound of water. A river, perhaps. With renewed hope, they changed direction, moving towards the sound. The forest opened up to reveal a wide, fast-flowing river. The water was dark and cold, but it offered a glimmer of hope. If they could follow it, it might lead them to civilization. "Come on," Mark urged, helping Lisa to the riverbank. "We can use the river to guide us." They waded into the shallow part of the river, following its course downstream. The current was strong, making progress difficult, but it was their best option. Hours passed, and the night grew colder. They were exhausted, their bodies aching from the relentless journey. Just as they were about to lose hope, they saw a faint light in the distance. The light grew brighter as they approached, revealing a small campsite with a flickering fire. A lone camper sat by the fire, cooking something in a pot. The sight of another human being brought tears of relief to their eyes. "Help!" Mark called out, his voice weak and desperate. The camper looked up startled. He grabbed a flashlight and hurried towards them, his expression turning to one of concern when he saw their state. "What happened to you?" he asked, helping them onto the riverbank. "Please help our friend," Sarah begged, pointing to Lisa. The camper, whose name was Tom, quickly assessed Lisa's condition. "She needs a hospital," he said, his voice grave. "There's a small town about an hour's hike from here. We need to get her there now." Tom packed up his campsite and led them through the forest. He moved with the confidence of someone who knew the terrain well, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. "You're lucky I was out here," Tom said as they walked. "Not many people come this way." "Believe me, we know," Mark replied, his voice heavy with exhaustion. They reached the outskirts of a small town just as dawn began to break. The sight of civilization brought a wave of relief. Tom guided them to the local clinic, where they were immediately taken in and treated. Lisa was rushed into surgery, and the rest of the group was treated for their injuries. They were exhausted, both physically and emotionally, but they were safe. The local sheriff came to take their statements. Mark recounted their harrowing ordeal, the abandoned cabin, the hunters, and the cult. The sheriff listened carefully, his expression growing more serious. "We've had reports of strange activity in those woods for years," he said, "but nothing like what you described. We'll send a team to investigate." Days later, after they had recovered enough to travel, Mark, Sarah, and Jake prepared to leave the small town. Lisa was still in the hospital, but was expected to make a full recovery. "Thank you for everything," Mark said to Tom, who had stayed with them throughout their recovery. "Just glad I could help," Tom replied. "Be careful out there." As they drove away from the town, the events of the past few days felt like a dark, surreal dream. They had survived a nightmare, but the scars, both physical and emotional, would take much longer to heal. True to his word, the sheriff sent a team to investigate the forest. They found the abandoned settlement, the cave, and the ritual site. The evidence of the cult and the dark rituals was undeniable, but the ancient, monstrous figure was nowhere to be found. It was as if it had vanished, leaving behind only destruction and fear. The sheriff reported back to Mark, assuring him that they were taking the matter seriously. "We'll do everything we can to make sure nothing like this happens again," he promised. Months passed, and the friends tried to return to their normal lives. But the memories of that fateful trip haunted them. They met regularly, finding solace in each other's company. One evening, as they sat together, Mark spoke up. "We need to tell people what happened. Warn them about those woods." Sarah and Jake nodded in agreement. "People need to know," Sarah said. "Maybe we can prevent this from happening to someone else." They decided to share their story, hoping it would serve as a warning to others. The tale of their terrifying ordeal spread, and soon the forest became known as a place of darkness and danger. Despite their efforts, reports of strange occurrences in the forest continued. Hikers went missing, and eerie whispers were heard at night. It seemed the ancient darkness that lurked in those woods was not so easily vanquished. Mark, Sarah, and Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. They often caught glimpses of shadowy figures in their peripheral vision and heard whispers that seemed to follow them wherever they went. The nightmares returned, more vivid and terrifying than ever. The twisted faces of the hunters and the monstrous figure plagued their dreams, filling their nights with terror. One night, Mark woke to find a strange symbol carved into his bedroom wall. It was one of the ancient symbols from the forest, a chilling reminder that the darkness was still with them. "We need to go back," Mark said, his voice filled with resolve. "We need to finish this." Despite their fear, the three friends returned to the forest. They were determined to uncover the truth and put an end to the darkness once and for all. They retraced their steps, finding the abandoned settlement and the ritual site. The air was thick with a sense of foreboding, and the whispers grew louder as they ventured deeper. They reached the cave once more, the entrance yawning like a mouth ready to devour them. They entered cautiously, their flashlights casting eerie shadows on the walls. The underground chamber was as they remembered, but this time it was empty. The altar stood silent and still, the air heavy with anticipation. As they approached the altar, the ground trembled, and the ancient, monstrous figure began to materialize once more. The friends stood their ground, ready to face the darkness. The creature lunged at them, its massive claws tearing through the air. Mark fired the rifle, the bullets having little effect. Sarah and Jake fought with everything they had, using their weapons to fend off the creature's attacks. The battle was fierce, the chamber echoing with the sounds of struggle and screams. But this time, they were prepared. Mark noticed the symbols on the walls and realized they formed a pattern. "Sarah, Jake, help me," he shouted, pointing to the symbols. They worked quickly, tracing the symbols with their flashlights, forming a circle around the creature. As the last symbol was traced, the chamber filled with a blinding light. The creature roared in pain, its form writhing and shifting. The light grew brighter, engulfing the chamber, and the creature in a radiant glow. The friends watched in awe as the creature began to dissolve, its dark essence being pulled into the light. With a final, deafening scream, the creature was banished, leaving behind only silence and darkness. As the light faded, the friends found themselves standing in the chamber, the air still and silent. The ancient symbols had disappeared, and the altar lay in ruins. "We did it," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "It's over." They emerged from the cave, the first light of dawn breaking over the horizon. The forest, once oppressive and dark, now seemed peaceful and serene. Returning to the town, they shared their story with the sheriff and the townspeople. The news of their victory spread, and the forest slowly began to lose its sinister reputation. Lisa recovered from her injuries, and the friends began to heal, their bond stronger than ever. They had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, their courage and determination a testament to their strength. Years passed, and the story of their ordeal became a local legend. The forest was declared a protected area, and the paths were carefully monitored to ensure the safety of visitors. Mark, Sarah, Jake, and Lisa moved on with their lives, but they never forgot the horrors they had faced. They used their experience to help others, sharing their story as a warning and a testament to the power of courage and friendship. With the darkness behind them, the friends looked forward to the future. They had faced unimaginable horrors and emerged stronger, ready to take on whatever challenges life had in store. The forest, once a place of terror, became a symbol of their strength and resilience. They had conquered the darkness, and now they could finally live in the light. Though the forest had returned to a state of calm, the friends knew they had to remain vigilant. They established a community watch, ensuring that the horrors they faced would not befall others. They organized regular patrols and educated visitors about the forest's history. "Never forget what happened here," Mark said during a community meeting. "We must always be prepared." As the years went by, stories of other dark entities began to emerge. Whispers of forgotten rituals and ancient beings that had yet to be discovered haunted their thoughts. One evening, while patrolling the forest edge, Mark noticed a set of footprints leading into the dense woods. They were fresh and human, but there was something off about them. "Sarah, Jake, we need to check this out," he radioed to his friends. Following the footprints, they ventured deeper into the forest. The air grew colder, and the familiar sense of dread began to creep in. They reached a clearing where a group of people stood around a makeshift altar. The symbols on the ground were different, but equally ominous. "We need to stop this," Sarah whispered, her voice filled with determination. They approached the group, demanding they stop their ritual. The leader of the group, a man with wild eyes and a fanatical expression, turned to face them. "You don't understand," he hissed. "We must awaken the old ones to protect us." "You're making a mistake," Mark said, his voice steady. "We know what happens when you meddle with these forces." The man laughed, a chilling sound. "You think you can stop us? We are more powerful than you know." A fierce battle ensued, the air crackling with dark energy. The friends fought bravely, using their knowledge of the symbols to disrupt the ritual. Despite their efforts, the ground began to shake, and a portal opened in the center of the clearing. A monstrous hand emerged, reaching for them. "Sarah, the symbols," Mark yelled, pointing to the ground. They quickly traced the symbols, forming a barrier around the portal. The hand recoiled, and the portal began to close. With a final push, they managed to close the portal, banishing the dark entity back to its realm. The remaining cultists fled, their plans thwarted. Breathing heavily, they looked at each other, relief washing over them. "We did it again," Jake said, his voice filled with exhaustion and pride. "We'll always be ready," Mark replied, determination shining in his eyes. The forest had been saved once more, but the friends knew their battle was far from over. They continued to watch over the forest, ready to face any new threats that might arise. They had become guardians of the forest, their courage and resilience a beacon of hope for all who ventured into the woods. Their story became a legend, inspiring others to stand against the darkness. The forest, once a place of terror, was now a symbol of strength and resilience. Mark, Sarah, Jake, and Lisa lived their lives, knowing they had made a difference. They had faced unimaginable horrors and emerged victorious, their bond stronger than ever. The forest was their legacy, a testament to their bravery and determination. And as long as they were there, the darkness would never prevail.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more chilling content.